Welcome, listeners, to another exciting episode of Nintenno Podcast. I am pretty pumped because today it's the first time in a while that I have recorded. I haven't recorded anything in like a week and a half now, and honestly, I haven't had all that much time to play Warframe because life has been crazy for me, but I'm back at it. I am back at the grind, and today I have the pleasure of being joined once again by another veteran. Mr. C13 is back, and you guys are really going to enjoy our topic for today. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of Nintenno Podcast. First of all, C13, welcome back to the show. How have you been doing the past few weeks?
Pretty good. Been playing a little bit of the Division. Really enjoying that.
Good choice.
But, keeping up with Warframe too.
You said you're pushing level 30 right now. Have you hit level 30 in Division?
Yeah, I just hit level 30 yesterday.
Nice. That's epic. Sweet. Well, I'm pretty pumped to have you back on the show. Like I said, it's been a while since I've recorded, much less had a chance to record with you or with one of our guys, so this should be fun. Our topic for today is all about resources and some good ways that you can grind. But before we do, last week you guys might have tuned in for a special kind of short episode that I did about syndicates, a new thing that well, it's not a new thing to the game, but it's a new thing that for me that I had jumped into. And there's a couple things that C13 would love to kind of share on that topic before we move into today's topic. So lay it on us, man. What kind of advice you got for us with syndicates?
Yeah, I just had a couple clarifications for the syndicate episode.
Sweet.
You were talking about chromatic blade. It's actually 50% status chance and not crit chance.
Oh shoot. I'm glad you caught that.
Yeah. We talked about that in our last interview where we talked about XCal and how that works good with condition overload because of status chance. So I thought I should just mention that. In terms of the weapons and the augments for the syndicate, they're actually tradable. For the weapons,
really?
They're only tradable if they're completely brand new. So if you haven't leveled them up at all or potatoed them or anything like that, like as soon as you buy them, you can go and trade them to another person for platinum. So I mean, it's obviously much easier to be a part of the syndicate, but since you can't run all six, well, I guess you can run all six syndicates, but it would take a lot of time and effort.
Oh yeah.
That you can still get those weapons or those augments if you trade. And a lot of times they'll say, you know, I'm pair and sequence and I'll trade 25,000 pair and sequence rep for 25,000 steel meridian rep. So basically you can swap augments with someone.
Oh, that's cool.
I don't see that a lot with the actual weapons, but I see that a lot with the kind of lower rep required items.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome info because I had no idea. I assumed you had to grind that stuff out yourself.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty nice to be able to trade them because most weapons aren't tradable at all. You know, you can only trade the parts, but the syndicate weapons are unique in that if they're, you know, fresh out of the box, then you can just trade them for platinum.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome.
As for the syndicates themselves, most people run 3 of them at a time just because of the ally versus enemy kind of system that they have going. And so if you look at your syndicate console on your orbiter, basically most people choose either the first 3 or the last 3 because none of them really interfere with each other. Technically, you can get 4 syndicates on your side, but it takes a lot more work, and I think it's just pretty overall inefficient for what you're trying to do because of the way that, you know, leveling certain ones will de-level your other ones. And lastly, you talked about the hero parts.
Yes.
And that you never see them for sale. That's because only prime frame parts are tradable. So anything that's just a regular frame, you can't trade it.
See, yet another thing that I didn't realize. And yet another reason not to hang on to that stockpile of Harrow parts.
Yep. Sell it all.
Nice, nice. Well, thanks for that clarification. And actually, that's something. Gosh, what show is it? I believe it's the Game Informer show. I don't know if you watch the GI show. I believe it's them, or it may possibly be Easy Allies. They have a segment on their podcast all the time where it's like the corrections from the past week. I think I'm gonna have to add an ongoing corrections segment to my show. But I mean, hey, that's kind of the charm, right? This is a noob teaching things to noobs with the help of veterans.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like you said anything that was really wrong too much.
Too much,
it's
right?
Because I mean, the blade thing was wrong, but it's not like people are gonna really change that much, you know?
Sure. I'm probably not gonna get any death threats over that one.
Yeah, it's just small things that you want to clarify later.
Yeah, for sure. Sweet. Well, thanks. I appreciate you bringing the notes. That's super helpful. I know not just to me, but to the listeners as well. And I'm hoping that our main topic today is going to be helpful also. One of the things you're going to learn really quickly if you're a newer player is that Warframe is all about the gameplay, it's all about the gunplay, but it's also all about the grind. And today, we're going to talk about some resources that you are going to want to grind for. And we're going to talk about some recommendations that CXIII has. And maybe even from my limited experience, I might even have some recommendations to throw in. Who knows? So today, we're just going to try to break down some of the things that you're really going to want to farm for and some of the best ways that we can get them. So where do you want to start this topic off, man? What do you think is the best way?
We could just start with farming credits. That's one of the basic, things people need.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess then with that topic of farming credits, to me, when I first started out, I didn't really think credits were that big of a deal because most of the stuff that I wanted was fairly cheap and you got credits all the time. But man, once I really got into more of kind of the mid game, I am burning through my credits.
Yeah, especially for upgrading mods, the ones that have, 10 ranks or whatever, takes so much. And if you get, primed mods, those cost even more. And if you buy them from people as opposed to Barrow, there's a credit trading tax for prime mods, which you have to pay 1 million credits for every primed mod you trade.
Ouch.
Which... Yeah, most of the time people are thinking, credits, they're fairly useless in a lot of things because, platinum is the kind of go-to currency, but
sure,
you do need credits for a lot of different things.
So what do you think is the best way for somebody maybe who's newer to the game to farm credits early on?
For a newer player, well, I should say first that if you are planning on farming a bunch of credits, the booster is available, which will double your credit gains, which, you can get it if you're lucky for the login. But if you do plan on, grinding out a bunch of credits all at once, it might be worth it to invest in a short booster for credits.
Absolutely.
In terms of where to farm credits early, I would say on Series is a really good place. There's 2 nodes, Seimeni and Gabby. Each give a flat bonus of, I think it's around 20 to 25k, depending on how many people are in your group.
Yeah, I've only done Gabby, but it's 25, I believe, is the flat one for that one.
Yeah, I think it starts at 20k and then it increases depending on how many people you have in your group. So it can go up to 25k. And that is a dark sector defense and a dark sector survival. So basically you run it for either 5 minutes for the survival or 5 waves for the defense, and then you just leave because it's a flat bonus, so it doesn't scale with how long you stay in. And you can just keep running that as many times as you need. And that's pretty credit early game, since Series it's pretty early on in the star chart.
Yeah, not too bad.
Another thing I wanted...
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
One thing I just wanted to mention is that for your first mission after the daily login reset, when you get the sort of login gift, is that your first mission will be double credits.
I was gonna ask you that just now. I had noticed with that Gabby mission that I didn't, and I got double credits on the first run, and I had no idea why. So that's totally answers my question.
Yeah, it's sort of a first mission of the day bonus where, it actually took me forever to realize it was even happening, because in the post mission screen, I never looked at credits. It's just something that, you gain passively, but it's something that's, if you're farming credits, sometimes it's worth noting that maybe for your first mission of the day, you want to do a high credit mission to get that double credits.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing that we've, I think, mentioned here on the show before, but just to reiterate, the double credit bonus stacks. So a couple days ago, we had, at least on Switch, we had the double credits weekend, and I bought a credit booster. And then the very first mission that I ran was Gabby. So you've got your base of 25. That got doubled for the weekend up to 50. That doubled again for the XP booster that I got up to 100. And then it doubled again because it was my first mission. So in my very first mission, I got 192,000 just for doing 5 minutes in an easy survival mission.
Yeah, that's how you want to do it, is be able to just keep stacking those double bonuses on top of each other.
Definitely. So what about somebody who's a little bit further into the game?
Further in, the go-to place is the index. The index is it's on Neptune, so it's a little bit further in the star chart.
Yeah.
What it is, it's a sort of arena mode. It's sort of like a sport where you fight against a bunch of corpus, and when you kill them, they'll drop these little points, and you collect the points and deposit them in a goal. And there's different levels of the index, but essentially you want to reach a predetermined mark, and when you do that, you win.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, so most people run the high risk index, which it costs 50,000 credits just to enter, but you win 250,000 if you win. And obviously, like you were saying, where if you have a credit booster, that boosts up to 500,000. If it's a double credit weekend, or if it's your first one, that boosts up to 1,000,000. So you can get a ton of credits at a time.
So how long would you say it takes to run one of those 50K indexes?
I'd say they're pretty short. Probably under 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes maybe, depending on your ability level.
That's a great return for that amount of time.
Yeah, they're actually really quick depending on, I mean, to be honest, if you just do it in a public group, at least on PCs, that most people are pretty good, gear wise, so that it's really easy. Like when I go in, I one shot all the enemies, so it's really simple. There's almost no risk of dying. There's some interesting mechanics in the index where the more points you're holding, you get bonus points. So like if you collect 15 points, that's the optimal time to turn it into a goal, you don't get 15 points. I think you get like 22 points because you get bonus points for the more points you're carrying. But on the flip side, it lowers your max health and it starts to drain your energy.
Oh, dang.
So for a lot of people, I just recommend going Rhino, because once you throw on Iron Skin, it doesn't matter what your max health is. And
sure,
to be honest, you don't really need that much energy if you just rely on your guns. So that's pretty much the easy mode for the index, is just run in, throw on Iron Skin, and you don't have to really worry about the health being lowered. And there's some other frames that can do similar things like Neja or Revenant, but Rhino is always my go-to in the index.
Nice. I'll keep that in mind because I'm really close. I feel like I'm making really slow progress because I'm just grinding for random new gear. So I still haven't made it there yet, but I'm almost there. I'm right on the cusp.
Yeah, there's also this is again for people later in the game, is that these aren't necessarily meant just for farming credits, but sorties are the sort of daily missions that there's 3 of them, and they give you 20,000 for the first one, 30,000 for the second one, and 50,000 for the third one.
Nice.
So the rewards for sorties aren't really credits, but it is a nice bonus that if you're there in the story progression, that you will get a decent amount of credits just passively from doing your dailies.
Nice. That's great. Okay, cool. That gives us some really good ways of getting stuff. Now, you've also got 2 miscellaneous junk that you can sell stuff off.
Yeah, you kind of covered this with the Harrow chassis last time.
Yeah.
And that another way, this isn't necessarily farming for credits, but if people look in their inventory, they'll have a ton of Oberon parts. Usually they'll have a bunch of Kavat incubators, some Boar blueprints, Harrow chassis. Depending on how often you fight the Stalker, you might have a bunch of Dread blueprints. And these, you should double check if they're used for another recipe or another blueprint, because, like, for example, the frame Chroma, each one of his parts requires a part from another frame.
Oh, yeah,
I don't remember it specifically, but I know, like, say his neuroptics, for example, might require Volt neuroptics, or, you know, his systems might be Saren systems or something like that. So double check if they're useful. If they're not, just go ahead and sell all those extras for credits, because you'd be surprised how often people will come and they'll say, oh man, I have 120 of each of the Oberon parts. What should I do with that? Just sell it.
For sure.
It's free credits.
Yeah, I'm that guy too that I always forget that I have them, and so I love it when I pull up my my foundry and I'm like, man, I really want to craft this thing, but I'm just, I'm 30,000 short or something, and then I go in and I have this useless crap and I sell it off, and here I am now. I suddenly have all the credits that I need.
Yeah, it's a nice little surprise if you don't check your inventory that often, to just be able to sell a bunch of junk.
Yeah, for sure. So we hit credits. That's the most, I'd say probably the most basic one, but then the next one after that, I would say, is probably affinity. So what are your recommendations for farming at affinity?
Affinity for the earlier game, and it's not even that early, it's sort of early, is Helene Saturn. I think is one of the best affinity farms. I think Grineer defenses in general are probably the best.
Yeah.
And so those are the ones I'd recommend. I really like Helene because you farm affinity really quickly. As you do, it's a defense, so as you do 5 waves, you get Meso relics, which is always nice to get more relics.
Yeah, for sure.
And Saturn is a planet that drops Orokin cells, which are often a pain to get if you're, earlier in the game.
Yeah.
So that's just a really efficient node. Also, like credits, Affinity have boosters available if you're trying to grind it out real fast.
Definitely. And we got lucky enough that in March, again on Switch, I don't know for sure on PC, but on Switch, we also had a double Affinity weekend. And so you're able to do that stacking thing just like we did with the credits.
Yep. PC hit all 3 of those marks too.
Nice. That's awesome. I mean, I kind of figured PC's pretty active.
Yeah.
So, sweet. And then there's also a similar one on Hydron Sedna, right? Is that the same type of mission?
Yeah, it's. I think it's even the same tile set. In fact, it definitely is. And I think it's slightly faster than Helene. And so a lot of times I prefer Helene just for the Orkin cells, but
sure,
Hydron's probably a little bit faster. But one of the last planets you're gonna get. So it's not gonna be an early game.
One little piece of advice, and again, this is kind of restating something that we talked about before on the show, but when you and I actually, I believe, talked about farming affinity a while back, you recommended Helene to me, and at that point, I was still lower MR. I was only like MR 5 or maybe just hit MR6. And when I first started into Helene, I was like, man, how do I grind affinity on this? I'm so weak. Like I'm equipping new gear and just getting destroyed. So just remember, the more affinity you get, the faster you're going to be able to farm affinity, because your MR is going to go up, and that allows you to equip more mods right from the start. So you can take, if you're MR 10, you can take a brand new unranked piece of gear and equip mods as though that gear was ranked 10 rather than unranked. So especially make sure you're mindful about raising your MR when you can, and getting that power boost, and that makes it a whole lot easier to jump in with unranked gear and start leveling it up in places like Helene.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's kind of like one of those things where it's easier to make money if you already have a ton of money.
Exactly.
So if you already have high MR or a ton of mods and all that, it's much easier to farm and do things like that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so what do we want to cover next?
Well, there's a couple of tips I just wanted to say for the affinity farm.
Sure.
Not necessarily places, but the way affinity works is that if you kill enemies with your weapon, or if your ally kills enemies, the affinity is split between your frame and your weapon's equip. So weapon kills or ally kills, 25% will go to your frame, and 75% will go to your weapons.
Oh, nice.
And if you kill the enemies with abilities from your frame, 100% of the affinity will go to your frame. So nothing will go to your weapons. And so the thing that helps about that is that you can level weapons faster if you only use one or two of them.
Sure.
So if you only have one weapon equipped, 75% of the affinity of weapon kills or ally kills will go to that specific weapon, as opposed to just 25% if you use the standard 3 weapons equipped. So
nice.
Depending on how you kill enemies, it changes the affinity spread, so to speak. And if you want to level one specific weapon, just use just that weapon.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's good advice.
So that should be it for affinity.
Sweet. Well, I guess then you want to move on to talking about farming some resources?
Yeah. Resources sounds good.
So there are a ton of resources in this game. And I feel like, for me, I feel like they've done a pretty good job at Digital Extremes of kind of rounding off the curve, where you're going to start out early on and you're going to say, man, I really need a lot of X resource. For me, it was like neurodes. Early on, I needed a lot of neurodes. And then after a little while, I started to get to the point where I was getting more of them and not struggling as much. But then I start to hit higher MR tiers of gear, and I'm realizing now I need more argon crystals, or, I need more, I don't know, whatever. And so there's always new pieces of resources that you're going to want, and you're going to have no idea how to get enough of them. So we have a lot of stuff that we can talk about with farming resources. Do you have any kind of general advice for resource farming that you want to hit on before we get into specifics?
I'd just say, if you're planning just like affinity and just like credits, there are boosters for resources. There's 2 different boosters. There's the resource booster, which doubles kind of like the other 2 boosters, but there's also a drop chance booster, which will make rare resources like Orkin cells or neurodes have a higher chance of actually dropping.
Nice.
So yeah, there's 2 different boosters that can help you with that.
So I think Helsing and I talked a little bit about that in the episode that he was on. I can't remember, though. I intended to ask him, do you know if those 2 things stack? Like if you can get doubled drop rate and doubled resources?
Yes, they do.
Dang, man, that's awesome.
Yeah, and if you're using a frame like Necros, who can essentially has the ability to desecrate corpses in order to get another resource drop chance, you
Dang.
can stack that. Or Hydroid has his tentacles. He has an augment called, I think, like Pilfering Tentacles, which
Yeah.
gives another drop chance. So if you got a Hydroid and a Necros and a resource booster and a resource drop chance booster, you're essentially really making resource farming, taking it to the max.
For sure. That's epic. Okay, cool. So yeah, those resource boosters and farming boosters for me, I don't know. There's some points where I'm like, it's probably not worth it. Right now, like with me right now, I've been super busy, so it's not been worth it to me to buy a bunch of those boosters. But if hey, over the next couple days, I don't have a lot going on, I think really any of the boosters are a good investment. They're worth what you put into them.
Yeah, the drop chance one's a little situational depending on what planet you're going to, because if you really need something, you might want to go, and get the drop chance booster. But a lot of times, for the boosters, the resource boosters, I'll take them when they come in the daily login. But I don't really get that concerned with them because, that might just be because I've been playing for a while. But
sure. Well, I mean, to each their own. That's kind of one of the cool things about Warframe. You can play it as free or as premium as you want.
Yeah, and it should be said that, we say platinum is a premium currency, but a little bit later we'll talk about ways to get platinum efficiently without spending $1.
Sure. Okay, so let's go on ahead and I guess talk a little bit more specifics. Let's talk about some of the resources that we can go after. First things first, you want to hit on extractors a little bit and kind of how they work and how they help us farm resources?
Yeah, extractors are super useful, especially if you're not someone who is able to play a tremendous amount and is constantly farming. They essentially let you passively mine resources from planets. So even when you're offline, the resource or the extractors are still going to farm them. And you get a certain amount of extractors available to you based on a couple things. One is your MR. So you start with one extractor, or with the ability to use one extractor. When you hit MR5, you get the ability to use 2. MR10, you get 3. And then if you're a founder, you get +1 to whatever you have. And if you've ever bought any of the Prime Access, you get +1.
Dang.
So essentially,
awesome.
It's possible to have 5 extractors at once. Realistically, most people aren't founders, so
right.
A lot of people are going to be running 3 or 4, depending on their interest in Prime Access.
Sure. Just out of curiosity, are you a founder? Did you get in early enough?
Oh no. I mean, I actually think my account might be early enough, but I didn't buy the founder pack, because at that time I just saw, it's a free game, let me try this. And then I was like, I don't really like this game that much. So yeah, it was a different game back then, man. You got, I think, 3 revives, then you started having to buy them with platinum.
Yeah, I heard that. Ugh.
It was a game where I was just like, lots of good ideas, lots of not so great mechanics that I'm not enjoying. So I played a couple of days and then I was like, I'm out. And
who would have known back then that you'd be putting 2,000 hours into this game?
well, that's not me. That's Aronis. I looked at mine on my my account, and mine's at 600, which is still probably
that's still a ton of time, though.
Too much for a single game. But
I think at this point, still around 200 is the longest that I've put into a game, and I'm pushing there. I think I'm at like 165 now, so I'm not too far away. So man, it's crazy. It's just this game is a bottomless pit.
Yeah, it really is. And it's also the free updates, man. They really, as soon as you start to play another game, start getting more and more into another game, and then like, oh, by the way, we added the open world Fortuna, and I'm like,
Right?
okay, reel me right back in.
Well, hey, I got us on a bit of a tangent there with that question. So why don't we jump back in and talk a little bit about, you want to do Orokin cells?
Yeah, Orokin cells. You can farm them on nodes. We already talked about Semeni or Gabby on Ceres.
Mm-hmm.
They have Orokin cells, and Helene on Saturn also do. And I think, in an earlier episode, I remember you mentioning there's no, you can't really waste your time in Warframe. Yeah. But if you go to nodes like Semeni or Gabby or Helene, you get really efficient use of your time.
Yeah.
Where you can farm multiple things. Like I was doing, I think it was a Void Fisher on Helene, and I was doing the Nightwave thing for unlocking or for opening Void Relics.
Yeah.
I was obviously opening Void Relics, so I got Prime Parts. I was leveling up a frame and a weapon, getting Meso Relics, and getting Orokin cells. So the more you can do at once,
sure,
obviously the better. And it works out great when you can kind of line everything up like that. But
yeah,
if you're looking for farming Orokin cells, Helene is good for if you not in a rush. I believe the assassination mission on Ceres has 2 bosses, and bosses have a higher chance of dropping rare resources.
Okay.
So if you need one Orokin cell right now, maybe go to the boss on Ceres.
Okay.
But if you're just trying to get, a stockpile of them, then either do the early game credit farm or the affinity farm, and you can passively get them.
Yeah, I think I'd advise that too, because I don't know, with the point that I'm at in the game, maybe I'm just not there yet, but for me, I haven't needed more than 1 or 2 Orokin cells at a time, so I have a decent sized pile of them that I've kind of saved up. So for me, doing something like Helene is a good way to get them, because I'm not, it's not like I need 8 at once or 1,000 at once.
Yeah, with Orokin cells, for the longest time I didn't have any. I was always like near 0.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of my clanmates said, well, why don't you just level on Helene for a while? And I said, well, is it as good as Hydron? Because I've done the Hydron leveling since I played on PlayStation. He said, maybe not as good, but you get a ton of Orokin cells, and now I pretty much mostly go to Helene just because of that passive getting Orokin cells. And it's for a lot of things you do need them. A lot of prime parts or prime frames, I think, need 10 Orokin cells for certain primes.
Okay. And I think pretty much every base frame, or most of the base frames at least, require 1 Orokin cell, I believe.
Yeah, and I think like catalysts and reactors, and there are lots of things that require them. So it's one of those where I was always had 0 to 4 Orokin cells, right. And I was struggling
for sure. Okay, so neural sensors are another one that come up fairly regularly. Where can we get those?
Neural sensors, you go to Jupiter, Sinai, or Io, both places to get neural sensors. They're not as, at least in my experience, they're not really as used as Orokin cells, but Jupiter is where you want to go to get them.
Nice. I guess we can keep rolling along then to gallium. That's another one that's a little bit more rare of a resource. Where can we pick up gallium at?
Gallium, there are a couple places, but I like Ophelia on Uranus.
Okay.
And that's actually a really good node. Uranus in general is pretty good because you can get, I forget what they're called, tellurium, something like that.
Okay.
Which is another rare resource that you can only get from missions with Arcwing sections.
Oh, okay.
But because of Uranus being partly underwater, then it can drop those. So that's
Nice.
really useful because, like most people, I'm not a big fan of having to farm in Arcwing missions.
No. I hate those things.
Yeah, and especially if you're just planning on sitting there and you got looking for a rare resource, it's really annoying.
Yeah, for sure.
And so to get an Arcwing resource without actually doing Arcwing, that's perfect.
So the next resource that's here on your notes is one that is near and dear to my grind at the moment, and that is argon crystals.
Yeah.
Argon is annoying. So, or at least it is for me.
Well, the most annoying part of argon is it decays.
Exactly. So the mechanic for decay, if I understand correctly, is that when you pick up argon, you have 24 hours of stable argon, and as soon as it is, well, not necessarily 24, but as soon as midnight rolls around, it starts a countdown timer, and once the timer ends after 24 hours, you lose half of your stockpile of argon. Do I understand that right?
Yeah, it's something like that, where as soon as, the next day rolls around, half of yours enters a sort of decaying state.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the next day rolls around, the decaying ones die, and half of your stable ones become decaying. And so argon is a unique resource in that you can't hoard it.
Yeah.
Only farm argon when you need to farm argon.
Yes.
And the best way that I've found is just void exterminations, just run through, massacre everything
Nice.
to get those little crystals.
I also heard from, I believe it was Aronis, when I was grinding, I was going after the Nakana. I had just got, I think it's like was it like a login reward or something? I don't even know. I got the Dragon Nakana blueprint. And so I decided to farm out the base Nakana. And I needed argon crystals for it, and I went into my crafting and was like, what the crap? I know that I have collected at least a dozen argon crystals. Where are they? And that's how I learned about the stupid decaying. He said that he also recommends doing capture. He said that exterminate and capture, and I can't remember the node that he said specifically, but he said that the reason he recommends capture is that you can usually run through it decently quickly. But again, you gotta do the void missions. That's the key. You're not gonna pick up those argon crystals if you're not headed into the void.
Yeah, capture's really, really quick. If you could get an early argon crystal and a capture, then you can definitely finish the mission really quickly. The reason why I say exterminate is that sometimes you don't get that argon drop right away, And
Sure.
so,
Yep. Yep.
so the more chances you have at it, the better. But capture is always a good option if you want to run things quickly and just hope you get in the short amount of time that the mission lasts.
Sure. So another, when you're really wanting to get on that power curve and start to kind of grind out is Endo. Endo is a big deal. What would you recommend as an efficient way to get Endo so that people can be boosting up their mods?
Endo's a little bit of an interesting one because of, there's no real place you want to go for Endo for the most part. I mean, there are certain ones that are better. There's obviously Maru's run that you go on to get the sculptures.
Sure.
And always you want to fill those sculptures with the Ayatan stars.
Yeah.
And sell those. So that's probably the most efficient way early game to farm it, even though you're limited to one mission at a time, so it's not like you can really farm it.
Sure.
Another good way to get Endo is breaking down mods into Endo, where you might have 50 I think like ammo cases or whatever the mod is called, and you can break all those down into endo, and depending on how much you play, you can get a ton of endo just by picking up, every mod, no matter how many you already have, and that's actually a pretty good source. It's kind of like how I mentioned selling miscellaneous junk for credit.
Yep.
That if you don't do it for a while, you might do it and end up with 40k endo.
Nice. So I just completely lost my train of thought. You had sorties written down as well. The sorties can be an option to grab endo.
Yeah, this is more of a later game thing. It's not really so noob friendly, but if you're at that point where you're doing sorties, one of the rewards for sorties is 4,000 endo.
Oh, nice.
And another is an Anasa, I believe it's pronounced, sculpture. It's essentially the highest endo sculpture.
Oh,
and
sweet.
That's another one of the rewards. Anasas, I think, are worth 3,500 endo. They're less than the 4k endo you get, but since they're tradable, I guess that gives them a little bit inherent value. So you can also, like I said, if you have the platinum and you need the endo, you can buy filled up Ayatan sculptures and turn those in for endo. So depending on your situation with endo and platinum, that might be an option.
Sure. Okay,
for
sweet.
Other later game things, there's the node, oh boy, Vodianoi.
Okay.
Sorry if I butchered that one for any, I think, Russian. But
sure.
It's a little bit like the way Sedna's boss works is you have to earn points in an arena to fight her. And there's a couple arena nodes. Vodianoi is one of them. And what a lot of people will do is they'll grab a Nidus and a Necros. And the Nidus has an ability where you can pull all enemies into a glob.
Ooh.
And then everyone just nukes them. And the Necros, he will essentially just use Desecrate to try to double up the corpse drops. And I think the only thing that the enemies drop there is endo, and they drop them in large quantities.
Wow, okay.
And so it's also the enemies, I'd call them mini bosses, because they're stronger than your average lancer. They have names and all that, but really they're not tough. So if you're at Sedna, you can just look in recruiting chat or find your own group in a clan of if people might want to farm endo at Vodianoi. Is a pretty quick one. And lastly, there's arbitrations. Arbitrations are sort of high-end missions that unlock once you do every node on the star chart.
Okay.
So this is, you really have to put in some grind for this one. But they're endless missions, defense, survival, excavation, those kind. And at every, I guess, reward break, there's a pretty solid chance of getting an Ayatan sculpture.
Oh, okay.
So that's a pretty solid way of getting more Ayatan. Plus you also get, I'm not sure what they're called, but arbitrations give a special currency that you can go and turn in for different mods or cosmetics, but they are also a really good way to get more Ayatan to sell for endo.
Awesome. Sweet. Okay, so I guess let's go on from there into ducats. Ducats are pretty important if you're wanting to buy some sweet loot from our friend Barrow.
Yep, ducats they're the way to get the primed mods, a lot of unique items that you can only get from Barrow. And I called it ducat farm, but it's also essentially a way to farm prime parts. It's essentially quickly opening up your void relics, you know?
Yeah.
And so for people who are doing void relic missions in order to farm, whether it's prime parts or to get ducats, generally you'll be able to see in the reward screen, the name will either be in gold, silver, or bronze. Pretty much you always want to get the gold, then the silver, and then the bronze.
Yep.
And I know a lot of people will say, well, I'm looking for this specific bronze piece. Should I go for it then? Now, you can, or you can get, you know, the gold, sell that, and buy 20 of the same bronze piece. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, it's a couple extra steps, but it's a lot of times it's worth it. There are some exceptions because certain void relics are vaulted, which means they're impossible to get right now. And so some of those pieces will sell for more. But generally, if you go for gold over silver over bronze, you pretty much can't go wrong.
Sure. Well, and two, the bronze you have more likelihood of getting those if you crack open a similar relic in the future. So even if you really want that part, you know, you're not missing out that bad because the chances of you getting it again are not real. You know, they're in your favor.
Yeah, and I mean, if you go, I mean, I'm not sure about Switch, but on PC, if you go on like Warframe Market and you look at a lot of the bronze pieces, they're, you know, 3 to 5 platinum or something like that. Which it's, you know, if you can sell something or just pretty much make platinum anyway, it's pretty small amount to get those pieces. For sure.
Sweet. So let's see what is next on our list here. Well, let's pause here real quick. As far as refining relics, do you think it's worth it if we're going through trying to be efficient here in our farming? Do you think it's worth it to put the credits into refining?
Well, refining relics, they cost void traces, which are a sort of resource you pick up doing void relic missions. So I think it's definitely worth it, especially because a lot of people, they'll refine relics to Radiant, which is the highest level, and then they'll form groups where everybody has the same Radiant relic. And so essentially you're giving yourself a very, very high chance to get gold or silver rewards. Because, you know, Radiant gives you a good chance, and if there's 4 of them, you have a really good chance. It's a little bit more iffy if you're just gonna take it to a pickup group, because, you know, if you want to be generous, you can, but most likely your teammates are going to be using intact relics, and so maybe you don't need to really refine it to higher chances. But if you're looking for a specific piece, I would recommend refining to Radiant and trying to find a group of people who are also willing to, you know, put in the void trace cost and really do it, because that's the best way to get the rarer parts from void relics.
Nice. And I would actually say this too. For me, I think I've said this before on the show, I'm definitely more of a solo gamer, but you don't want to do that when you're cracking open those relics, because you're getting 4 chances at getting something gold when you've got 3 other people that are in. Plus, you get the benefit of, if people choose the item that comes from your relic, you get a little bit of a bonus. So I would definitely say, if you're going to be cracking open relics, do it in a group. Find some randos or find friends. The most efficient way, of course, would be, you know, finding friends that are all going to crack the same relic open and dump stuff into it. But even if not, just find some randos, do it with people so that you get the highest chances possible of getting good items out of those relics.
Yeah, that's definitely the way to go with void relics. I even get annoyed when I only get 3 people in my group instead of 4.
Right.
You know, it's always that 4th guy. You know, that 4th guy is the one that's going to have the gold reward, even if it's just an intact relic. You just want the most, you know, the most at bats, kind of, you know.
Sure.
Where the more chances you get, the better things are.
Sure, and it's not it's Warframe isn't entirely a rolling the dice type game, but it is one of the core fundamentals of Warframe is RNG. So you just want to play those odds in your favor at all times as much as possible.
Yep, definitely. For mission types, for the farming, I was gonna say if you're gonna do if you're looking for real quick, capture is the way to go. It is the fastest mission you can do pretty much out of all of them, but I tend to prefer endless missions like interceptions. I think it's just more people tend to be willing to stick around, and a lot of times if you do endless missions, it's also pretty good for farming other things like cryotic if you're doing excavation, or if you need to level things up with affinity. So I just tend to prefer endless missions personally.
Yeah, but, I'm with you.
Captures are really good for the fast single mission. I think interceptions are probably pretty in that pretty fast area. Interceptions and excavations. I will say about excavations that doing them in pickup groups can be kind of annoying because there's not a set time or a set limit on how fast things go. Like for the interception, you have until your percentage hits 100 to get your 10 reactants to open up the relics. With excavations, it's every 2 excavators. And the annoying part is that in pickup groups, people will tend to just say, oh, look, an excavator I can pop. And so you have 3 running at once. You'll finish your last one. You'll get, whatever. You'll open your void relic. And the other 2 are already running. So you have essentially, 30, 40 seconds to collect 10 reactants, which most of the time you're not going to be able to do. And so a lot of times you're like, well, I mean, I guess we got, 2 excavators done, but we didn't crack our relics. And it's just one of those things that it's really annoying to me where it goes to choose your reward screen, and none of us can pick anything because people decided that they wanted to start the extractors.
Yep. Yeah. I've been there before. That's really annoying. And I would definitely say one of the perks, I love going fast on those relic missions. I personally really like doing what you're saying of going for the captures. But it is nice too if you've got the time to sink into something like a defense or like an endless thing. I mean, you're obviously gonna be able to crack your relics, and plus you have the benefit of being able to farm for other resources as well if you got the time. So I'm with you there. All right, well, CXIII, man, this has been awesome. This has been super good and really helpful for me too, man, because even though, a couple 100 hours in, I still have a bunch of new stuff that I have learned about grinding and resource farming, and there's, good grief, there's like a never-ending pool of things that I want to grind for. I think for this week, we are going to call this part 1 of our resources episode. We will be back again soon with another episode, part 2, where we're going to hit on a lot of other things that you might want to grind for. But before we go, as always, it is time for our Gear of the Week, and it is Veteran's Choice today. So, CXIII, what piece of gear do you have picked out for our listening pleasure?
This time I picked out the frame Limbo.
Ooh, nice choice.
Limbo is probably the most hated frame in the game.
Right?
He's incredibly polarizing because he's super strong at certain things, but he also, if Limbo is bad, it's the worst experience in Warframe in terms of grouping with people.
Right.
Because he can also slow you down incredibly, can, nullify a lot of your weapon damage, and so it's one of those where if you play with a good Limbo, certain missions will become comically easy, and if you play with a bad Limbo, quit the mission because it's not worth playing.
That's pretty funny. Well, I guess let's start out before we get into his abilities too much. Let's talk about how to obtain Limbo.
Limbo, you get him through a quest called the Limbo Theorem.
Okay.
It's pretty easy to just, follow pieces. It's kind of broken up in that, you go and I'm not sure what the specific ones are, but I know you kind of go on a short mission, and then you go do an extraction, and that essentially, even though you're extracting cryotic, it kind of treats it as, oh, you extracted his, neuroptics blueprint. And
okay, cool.
so yeah, I think you can get that fairly early. I'm pretty sure you have access to it by now already.
Yeah, I believe I do. I haven't done it yet, but I believe I have access.
Yeah, so it's just one of those things that you can, do as a quest. And the prime is just like every other prime, is just void relics.
Okay, cool. Well, then let's jump into a little bit more about Limbo. So what is it that makes Limbo so powerful and also so marginalizing?
His passive and his kind of whole kit revolves around the rift, which is essentially, I would say, a parallel plane of reality sort of thing.
Okay.
Where you're obviously still in the stage or, the tile set, but if you're in the rift and the enemies aren't, you can't affect each other. You can't damage them. They can't damage you.
Okay.
And so it's a real weird thing in terms of interactivity versus non-interactivity because of the rift.
Sure.
And so his passive essentially is if you roll or dash, whatever you want to call it, you'll go into the rift. And if you do it again, you'll go out of the rift. Also, the first time you go into the rift, or if you roll into the rift, you'll open a small portal behind you that your allies can also run through to go into the rift.
Oh, cool.
And so you'll see in a lot of Limbos where, if you're, let's say, in a mobile defense and you're just running to the next console, they'll just dash once and they'll be invulnerable on the way to the console.
Dang, that is really cool.
Yeah. And also, when you're in the rift, you get a passive 2 energy per second.
Okay.
And if you're in the rift and you get enemies in the rift, which we'll go over a little bit later, and I think this might apply to Limbo only, I'm not 100% sure, you also get 10 energy per kill. So you get passive energy and you also get energy for killing guys. So you really gain energy really fast.
Yeah, for sure.
So his first actual ability is called Banish.
Okay.
And it's a cone-shaped attack, which will push enemies into the opposite plane that Limbo's in.
Oh, wow,
so
that's cool.
if you're in the regular plane and you banish someone, suddenly they're in the rift, and it does damage. I would not recommend just banishing enemies, because that, again, one of the most annoying parts of Limbo, you're doing a defense, he presses 1 on an enemy, and suddenly no one can kill that enemy except for that Limbo if he decides to dash into the rift. So
that's obnoxious.
Yeah, if you're in a mission with a Limbo and you're shooting an enemy and nothing happens and you kind of see weird whitish shimmering around them, it's like, oh, they're in the rift. There's essentially nothing you can do about it until it either expires, the Limbo kills them, or pushes them out of the rift. Dang. So that, like I said, it's really good but really bad. Now, we talked about the really bad, but the really good is that in a rescue mission, you banish the rescue target.
Yeah.
And suddenly, you can stand in the middle of a group of enemies and do emotes and dance, and they can't do anything about it. It does have a duration. So there's a couple of different builds you can go, but most are pretty high duration.
Sure.
And like mine, I think my banish lasts for like 62 seconds or something in my standard build. So that's plenty of time to rescue a target, banish them, and get out. There's,
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's really no rush. Another really useful thing for banish is if you have an ally who's an ability-based frame and they ask for it. Don't go around banishing people because you think you know what's good for them. That you will get raped. I mean, it's probably more difficult to type on Switch, but on PC, people will very quickly express their unhappiness with being banished. But
oh yeah, I'm sure.
Like a Saren or a Mesa, even though their guns won't work if they're in the Rift, their abilities do. Abilities transcend the Rift. So you can banish a Mesa, they'll stand in the middle and be able to just blast everything down with their Peacemakers and be untouchable. Or for a Saren, they'll be able to spread their spores and be untouchable. So it's a really, really powerful ability if used correctly.
Yeah, for sure. That's really cool. Okay, awesome. So, what about his next ability? What about stasis?
Stasis it essentially puts enemies in stasis if they're in the Rift, and so they can't move, they can't shoot, they can't do anything. It has great synergy with his fourth ability, which I'll get to later, but it's pretty simple ability that, for the duration, they just can't do anything.
Nice.
His third ability, I'd say, don't press it. Just don't use it. Do not use it.
What does it do?
Maybe there's some limbo mains who will say, no, I found a great use for it. But essentially what it is, it's a radial effect that, you can hit a bunch of enemies around you. But when it essentially procs a small area effect banish from the enemies. And so that's the reason why I say don't use it, is that banish is great in a controlled usage.
Okay.
And if enemies are dropping area effect banishes, you're suddenly introducing an element of RNG where you don't really know where they're going to walk before the banish hits. And suddenly they're going around and they're banishing guys you don't want to banish and stuff like that. And so I don't remember when the last time I pressed 3 on my limbo was, just because it's such an iffy ability in terms of how controlled it can be.
Sure.
Yeah, so my advice is just don't do it.
It sounds like the overall advice for Limbo as well is probably to pick this frame up and then play around with it a little bit in solo before you jump in and take people off in groups.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, if you're playing Excalibur, you can roll your face on the keyboard, press whatever button you want, and you will have no effect on your teammates.
Yeah.
If you do that with Limbo, you'll get some unfortunate messages from your teammates, and you'll find yourself in a solo mission, even if you don't go solo,
Yep.
Because it's incredibly frustrating to play with a Limbo who just I'm just going to press this button and just has no real plan for what they're doing. And it's kind of hard to be mad at lower MR guys because they just finished this quest and got this really weird looking frame with all these crazy abilities.
Right.
Let me go try and figure out what he does. And then it's just, but people who are experienced are just like, oh my God, this again.
Yeah, and probably rightfully so.
Yeah, it's a real annoying one.
Man, this has been a very fun interview to do. But I'm sorry, go ahead. You still had more?
Yeah, his last ability.
Oh, shoot, man. I'm an idiot. I thought we'd already done the last one. Continue on, sir.
His last ability is called Cataclysm.
Okay.
It's essentially a large bubble around you of rift. And so what you can do is you just combine that with stasis. And so any enemies that walk in are suddenly frozen. And so they walk in and you can shoot them. They can't do anything about it. The only thing you have to look out for is Corpus nullifier bubbles, which will take your Cataclysm down.
Okay.
But Cataclysm is perfect for excavators and extraction. As long as there's no nullifiers, no enemies can touch the extractor. They're perfect for mobile defense. No enemies can touch, the console. Just, it makes it so that you pretty much can't lose.
Wow.
In terms
cool.
of protecting certain things. And it also has really good synergy with, I won't say what specifically, but there are abilities you get the further in you do in the main story.
Okay.
And they synergize really well with his Cataclysm ability.
Nice.
And, for the people who think Limbo is annoying now, his old ability used to completely freeze projectiles.
Oh, geez.
So you couldn't even shoot guys if the rift was in stasis. There were kind of cool things you could do, like if, let's say you had enemies coming from all four sides, you could shoot a bullet at each one of them, and the bullet would be frozen in the air, and then you turn off stasis and they'd all get shot at the same time. So that was kind of funny just to, do some Matrix kind of things, but
sure.
That, if you think people hate Limbo now, you should have seen Limbo before.
That's great.
And just real quickly about his builds.
Yeah.
You can go with a high range build, which is, protects a large area. It's really vulnerable to nullifier bubbles if you're fighting against Corpus, and can sometimes annoy your teammates. Sometimes because, you're doing it wrong, other times because teammates are just annoying sometimes.
Sure.
But you can also do a low range build, which will generally cover like just a defense pod or just a console, and pretty much leave everything else unaffected. And the last build is super, super niche. It's max range, max strength, minimum duration. And you press your 4, and it basically destroys all the containers in this room and like the next 3 rooms. Or it's also if you do hive missions. Have you done any hive missions?
No, I don't believe so.
There's like a hive node, 3 hive nodes, and each node has, I think, 4 tumors in the general vicinity around it. Okay. And you got to kill the tumors in order to attack the hive.
Oh, dang.
But if you have that max range, max strength, you just pop the ability, kills the tumors. You don't have to go around looking for them. And
that's cool.
It's a real specific build, but it helps for certain things.
Yeah, definitely. That's really neat. I'm just now kind of coming out of the place where basically I was only I was only building for whatever could dish out the max damage in an average mission. And I'm kind of only just now reaching the point where I'm really like making multiple builds for, specific circumstances, specific enemy types that I'm fighting and things like that. So it's pretty cool when you start to dig into that deeper stuff and realize how much DE allows you to build builds that are really functional in most circumstances, and then also others that are like really good in certain situations.
Yeah, depending on the builds, especially once you get to corrupted mods, which will raise one stat and lower another.
Yeah,
you can find that like it makes frames almost function differently.
Yeah,
not necessarily mechanically, but just in terms of effectiveness, where suddenly this ability becomes really good, but if you change it to this build, this ability is the key to it. Yeah, it's really interesting to see the different build types.
That's awesome. Sweet, man. Well, I have had a blast recording this episode. Thank you for giving us your time again and your advice. I think this will prove helpful to me, but also hopefully to our listeners as well. So CXIII, thank you again for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This has been another exciting episode of Nintenno Podcast. Don't forget, we do have a YouTube channel. I have not forgotten that we have a YouTube channel. It's just been a while since I've been able to actually do some editing, but it still exists. You can follow the links in the episode description to check that out. We do our best to put up a video version of each of the episodes as often as we can, as well as some tips for just random stuff, which I'm planning on doing more of in the coming weeks. Also, don't forget you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Nintenno Podcast to keep up to date on everything. And if you like what you hear, if you are just filthy stinking rich and you want to buy me a cup of coffee, you can do that by going to the link in the description to support the show. So thank you guys yet again for watching and listening to Nintenno Podcast. And until next week, keep on farming those frames.